Now then, let's move on and bring you a bit of analysis on this story. Javin Naidu is a political analyst at Oxford Economics, is joining us now live on the program. Javin, thank you for your time this evening. So let's start with the broad picture here, right? Because this is not the first time that there's been an attempt to have a deal or bring peace in the eastern end of the DRC. Those past deals haven't really held up. What's different this time?
Yes, thanks for having me, Rama. Yeah, that's the big question. I think all the analysts and everyone that's looking at this, will it hold up? I'd like to be positive, and for the sake of the Congolese people and the amounts of people that have been hurt around the Great Lakes, I hope it holds. But there are real concerns that it's just sort of papering over the cracks. I think the one thing it might add some kind of stability is the fact that these were very high-level engagements, and the fact that this deal, obviously, which was mediated by the Qataris and the US, was able to get President Paul Kagame and Felix Tshisekedi in the same room, which the Rwanda process was unable to do, which eventually failed. So I think the big thing is this deal has a bit more high-end buy-in by the leaders of these two countries. They've been a bit more involved, whereas the AU mediations and the Rwanda process have sort of lacked that. So I think that's the big one. And I think the sort of nugget of the economic integration and the value of, the US trying to bring its money in here may be the thing that sort of can hold it together. But there's a lot of questions of will it actually bring peace? I kind of see this deal, Rama, as more of a sort of long truce, an idea of getting a long truce rather than actually dealing with the real issues at hand.
Indeed. Is that the money question? Is that essentially what enabled, the Qataris and the Americans to be able to get these two parties to sit down and talk and agree on something? Because like you point out, right, the AU has tried to mediate in this conflict. We had the Rwanda process. The East African community got involved. African solutions here clearly didn't work, but external mediation from the Qataris and the Americans clearly worked. There's a lesson in there for African policymakers, isn't there?
Yes, definitely. I do think there's a lesson there. Was the way in which you can blend sort of these diplomatic talks with some kind of economic value. So look, the Qataris and the Americans are not just doing this out of the goodness of their heart. There is some value in which they're going to be getting out of this. There will be some strategic value. Qatar has been placing itself as the sort of the global diplomatic power to sort of broker peace. It's trying to create its image in that. And the US is looking for a foothold. In one of my latest pieces at Oxford, we sort of analyze what's it in for the US, and the whole idea is that by helping broker this peace deal, they're going to get access to critical resources important for the fourth industrial revolution. And currently in the Congo, Chinese companies currently dominate that space, particularly around coltan and cobalt. So it's definitely the money element is the thing that's bringing this together. Also, the DRC's economy, it does function in a sort of chaotic way, but it needs help. Also, amid all the tariffs from President Trump, the fact that they're willing to put some money into the Congo and Rwanda is also, adding a nugget per se instead of the stick in, with some of these negotiations.
Bloomberg had some interesting reporting on this hours ago, essentially outlining the economic integration plan that you're speaking about between the two countries. And there were three main components to it, at least from what I read, right? There's a mineral revenue sharing bit. The investments are going to go into road, rail and energy, and developing a hydropower plant that essentially hasn't really made much progress in the last couple of years. The mineral revenue sharing, though, is the key element. It's a linchpin of this deal, isn't it? How exactly will that work?
Yeah, so that's a complicated one. We've been trying to sort of piece this together, and over the last couple of months, particularly with revenues falling in the eastern DRC, Kinshasa has pretty much shut down, basically in the Kivus, the financial system, and the rebels that are managing the area have been sort of looking at where can they get money. They've been using some rumors that they've been using Rwandan franc. But from when I look at it and sort of analyze the report you're talking about, I think they're probably looking at joining of parastatals, so there probably would be some kind of deal between the DRC's mining companies and the Rwandan state authorities to sort of have a joint venture in which they can share revenues, because we know a lot of revenues are lost through the minerals that are stolen in Eastern DRC and then sometimes sold out through Rwanda. So I think in that case, there's definitely be some kind of mineral sharing. Probably they look at rights and how they can share rights for this critical resource, particularly coltan and cobalt. So I think they're going to look at that. But again, the devil's in the detail, Yarama. How are they going to operationalize this truce into like sorting out the finer details, because as you mentioned earlier, many peace deals have come in the Eastern DRC, but the problem is operationalizing them. And then just the other interesting thing that you mentioned about the road and railway, that's another big thing that the Americans are really interested in. It's not specified in this Bloomberg piece you referenced, but it is definitely talking about the libido corridor, which is extremely vital for the Americans to get resources out. So that goes from the DRC up into Angola. President Biden's last visit was to Angola to talk about the libido corridor. So you see, there's a lot of strategic playing here. So it's not generally, it's complicated.
Indeed. And of course, there's a bigger question of whether or not the Americans can actually put public money into that. But I want to get back to the question around the rebel groups, right, in the eastern end of the DRC. There's dozens of them operating in that area. They've been earning revenue from illicit mining in the region. So they're probably going to sit back and say, okay, you guys have signed this peace deal in Washington, D.C. What's their incentive to either formalize or disband under the terms of this deal?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I know, following a lot of the M23 leaders and what they say, one of the key, obviously them being the main combatant, as you mentioned, there's more than 100 groups there. First of all, I think they might be slightly annoyed that they weren't involved in this process. I know that the peace deal doesn't refer to them, but how can we incentivize them? I think maybe the first one we could look at is there might be some kind of amnesty or some pardon. M23 are accused of, and some of these other rebel groups are accused of committing war crimes, going against Geneva Conventions. So maybe you can have some kind of amnesty. I think the other one is to sort of maybe, again, this is going to legitimize some of the of those things that M23 have done, but maybe bring them in, Rama. Maybe say, okay, fine, we have this new deal, we can share some revenues with you. And as it is, M23 have been operating not just as a conquering power, but as a governing power. They're trying to sort of govern the two provinces which they control. So I think it's going to have to try and sort of maybe forgive them for their crimes, maybe bring them in and say, okay, we can share some revenue with you. But then also, they really need to deal with the core issues. M23 are quite concerned about Tutsi interests in the Congo. They're essentially concerned about that. And if you can address those issues, then you will go a long way to dealing with that. But then again, as you mentioned, there's 100 different groups also with their own interests. But I think this deal really focuses mainly on M23's concerns.
Right. One last question for you. The deal also, as I understand it, obliges the DRC to neutralize the FDLR, the remnant of the former Rwandan authorities responsible for the 1994 genocide. But since the DRC's army has struggled for years, at least for as long as it's been here at CGTN, the last 13 years, they've been struggling to contain rebels in that region. Why would they be successful now in dealing with the FDLR when they failed to deal with them in the last decade plus?
Yeah, I think the only way they're going to be successful here is that they're going to have to get support from the Americans in terms of, the earlier agreements or the discussions around the Mundell deal was some military or armed support. They're going to need to ramp up some of the technologies or the resources that the army has, because as we saw, as a South African, we had our troops there, part of the SADC mission, and they took heavy losses up against M23, who were armed with some of the latest technology. So the armed forces of the Congolese, they need to be upscaled, they need to be improved to get rid of the remnants of the FDLR, which some estimate, there are some estimates around, there's about 8,000 of them in the Congo, some say 5,000, but they're going to need that because the Congolese forces are tired. They've been fighting multiple wars. Essentially, since the end of the genocide, they fought 2 Congo wars and constant instability. So these guys are tired. So they're going to need some stuff to up their morale. So I don't know where this is going to come from. It's going to have to come from some direct American support in assisting them. Maybe the Rwandans can get in if the Rwandans say, okay, look, we're going to pull back our support, alleged support, which they deny against for M23, and help the Congolese get rid of the FDLR, which is one of their core gripes. So maybe this is a way in which they can sort of co-opt the Rwandans in. So I think that might be a nice way of doing it. But again, lots of discussions, and the problems in the Congo and the Eastern DRC go well before even the genocide, from probably the independence of the Congo. So yeah.